Reprise du débat, the honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Monsieur le Président, c'est avec plaisir.
Mr. Speaker, it's with pleasure that I speak in favour of Bill C-45, an act respecting cannabis, and to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Criminal Code, and other acts. As my colleagues have pointed out, the present approach to cannabis does not work. It leads to crime and organized crime and helps criminals make profits off young Canadians.
Subject has not stopped Canadians from using it. In 2015, approximately 12% of Canadians reported consuming cannabis in the past year. For young adults between the ages of 20 to 24, that rate is more than double at 30%. The vast majority of Canadians are obtaining cannabis products from the illegal market. This cannabis is produced without regard for public health and safety, often in clandestine circumstances with no oversight over how it is produced, no testing for dangerous or unhealthy contaminants, and no requirements whatsoever with respect to appropriate safeguards, factual and accurate labeling, or child-resistant packaging. That's why our government is moving to enact this legislation. The bill would better protect the health and safety of Canadians by providing access to a legal and quality-controlled supply of cannabis while implementing strict controls to restrict youth access to cannabis. On the illegal market, cannabis products are often grown, produced, stored, and sold without regard to public health and safety and accountability to the consumer. The products may be contaminated with pesticides, heavy metals, molds, and bacteria, and the source of this cannabis is often obscure or unknown. The bill would ensure that the production of cannabis in Canada is subject to a high and consistent national standards in terms of product quality, as is the case under the current regime for the production of cannabis for medical purposes. This means that under Bill C-45 and the supporting regulations, all producers would be subject to a licensing process that verifies that they have the capacity to meet the product quality control standards, and producers would also have to conform to standards in terms of the safety and security of their facilities, the vetting of personnel, record-keeping, and inventory controls. This would include rigorous requirements for product quality testing, standard operating procedures that must be observed throughout the facility, a sanitation program, and product recall measures to address any product-related issues. The proposed framework would require that product quality be controlled through mandatory testing requirements and that a robust compliance and enforcement regime would be in place. In fact, Canada already has a world-leading system in place to regulate the production of cannabis for medical purposes, which provides a solid basis upon which to build. So let me provide you with some of those regime requirements. Under the current regime, which has been in place since 2014, Health Canada is responsible for licensing and overseeing cannabis producers. These producers are required to operate within the regulations to provide quality control cannabis to registered patients. There are currently 67 producers that are licensed to produce cannabis for medical purposes, and these producers are the only commercial source in Canada of legal, quality-controlled cannabis for medical purposes. The regulatory framework sets out a series of strict requirements that must be met to protect the health and safety of Canadians and the integrity of the legal system. For example, licensed producers are required to utilize strict production practices in their facilities, such as having a quality assurance person and a sanitary program. Each licensed producer is required to test each and every product lot prior to its sale to the public, and this includes tests for metals, mold, bacteria, and other potential contaminants which can be harmful to public health. If the test results are outside of identified specifications, the product must not be sold. Licensed producers are also required to test each lot for THC and CBD potency levels, and the results must be displayed on the labels. Health Canada also announced recently that it will require all licensed producers to conduct mandatory testing of all products destined for sale for the presence of unauthorized pesticides. Ces standards et contrôles sont appuyés par une...
These standards will be supported by a rigorous regime which will be enforced in order to make sure that only those authorized will deal in it and that it be regulated at all stages of production. This system will have various inspections to make sure that people get authorization to authorize things every year, to make sure that best practices and rules are used and that only authorized pesticides will be used. This will help us to make sure that people who work in these areas will be safe. Last year, Health Canada inspectors carried out thousands of inspections in workplaces, and some areas were regulated 7 to 4 times.
Product released for sale to the public meets a high quality standard. But as in any industry, there may be circumstances in which a product may be released for sale that does not meet the established regulatory standards. So to address these situations quickly and authoritatively, the regulatory framework requires that licensed producers have a recall system in place to promptly contact clients and remove products that do not meet these high standards. In short, Bill C-45 would build on a well-functioning, effective system to help ensure that the cannabis that is legally sold in Canada is strictly regulated and quality controlled. And in addition to setting controls similar to those existing under the Cannabis for Medical Purposes regime, C-45 would put in place a set of additional measures, tools, and resources to protect health and safety of Canadians. La publicité des produits de consommation.
Publicizing products for consumption can help us in carrying out our responsibilities in setting reasonable standards so that this can become part of public policy and come under our health policies. We'll use the best practices, those that have proved their efficacy, and we'll try to prevent adverse consequences for young people. Publicity will be based on
would also ensure that packaging is child resistant, reducing the risk of accidental consumption. They would also set limits for potency and portion size and require factual information to be clearly presented on the product. The oversight and regulation of production at the federal level would provide all Canadians with the assurance that no matter where cannabis is produced or sold, it would be subject to the same high quality and safety standards and requirements across the country. In conclusion, this bill provides a real opportunity for Canada to address health and public safety issues associated with the illegal cannabis market. The proposed framework would establish a robust system that would allow adults to have access to legal and quality-controlled products as a result of a well-regulated framework and compliance and enforcement. This would place Canada in a better position to protect the public health and safety of its youth and Canadians as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for her speech. And she quite rightly pointed out that we've had a medical marijuana system in Canada for 4 years that is a very well regulated and controlled system with quality control testing and good tracking on the production and distribution of medical marijuana. We heard at Health Committee that Washington State took their medical marijuana system and extended that to the recreational marijuana and got the best results in terms of eliminating organized crime and making sure young children up to the age of 21 can't get a hold of the drug. And so I'm questioning the member, why did the government not take that experience from Washington that had the best results and put that system in place if they were going to legalize it, instead of this haphazard patchwork thing that we have across all provinces and territories?
The honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
We have a world-leading system of medical purposes cannabis regulatory and controlling of the and licensing of the sale of cannabis. And we're using this leading edge to be able to ensure that we can expand it to the recreational as well. This is something that is important because we have to address the situation now, because it's in the hands of the criminals, it's in the hands of our youth, and people are using it now. We need this legislation to be able to protect the Canadian public health and safety so they know the quality of the product they're getting and that we have a regulatory oversight of it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for, let me just double check that.